Perfect, no problem. We have sustainability plans, we have an energy management plan, but we didn't have a corporate strategy. And I was sitting firmly in the energy management side, really happy about what I was doing. And then the emergency climate declarations came around, and our council declared a climate emergency and said, and then the motion was staff shall develop a strategy for the corporation. And that's when, oh, this never works for me, does it? Oh, so then I'm like, that, yes, because, well, the energy management stuff seems pretty simple, and I felt like the GHG stuff, for some reason, was like, well, this is, I don't know what I'm doing. And the best part about our industry is that we can beg, borrow, and steal from people. If you don't know what you're doing, you just ask others. So, and you could tell I wasn't putting a lot of data on these slides, but so I was actually in a conversation with Tom. This is pre-COVID, I think, and we were talking about solar or something like that, and he mentioned that Burlington had to deploy, I think, 1 megawatt of solar every year in order to kind of get to their targets. And then I was like, oh, that's a lot of solar. And then it started to click for me is that you need to power your corporation with renewables in order to be a net zero entity. So that was like the first kind of trigger for me. And then Tom also mentioned that they did an exercise, kind of a desktop exercise, where they went through their whole kind of corporate portfolio and said, if we electrify our buildings and we count all those kilowatt hours up, and we know what that is, then we know the size of the solar array we need to power our corporation. And that is like one major step to understanding net zero. And that was really a big thing for me, because I had no clue how we were going to do this, but it seems pretty simple when you just say, okay, well, let's just calculate this all up, and there we go. And then later I was at a presentation for the Mayor's Megawatt, and they had a presentation, zero overtime. And this is where you incorporate net zero considerations in your capital asset management and your capital planning. So when you do introduce a net zero solution, you're doing it as your infrastructure renews, and then you are understanding just the incremental cost, if there is one, of going to net zero. So then I kind of had, like, that was kind of the three things that really triggered, okay, this is the pathway, is that we have to electrify, we need to deploy renewables, and we also have to plan for deploying all of this infrastructure in the life cycle of our capital renewal. So I put this in a cool slide. I call it shrink the pie, which is conservation. You want to make your energy pie as small as possible. Fossil fuel diet, you go to electrification. So you convert all of your natural gas or propane or heating systems basically to electricity, and then you deploy renewables. And the benefit about electrification is that when you convert from natural gas to electrification, it gives you the ability to generate that energy through solar. And by doing that, you get an economic benefit. So you're going down the path here of, if we electrify everything, we put up a solar array that can, in theory, power everything, we're going to get an economic benefit that will pay for itself. And that's like the baseline of kind of my thought here when it comes to the building portfolio. And I'm only referring to the building portfolio. I understand there's more emission sources in the corporation, but I have so much time, and this is the more fun stuff to talk about. So now, how do you do this? So COVID kind of slowed us down, and we didn't really do much in terms of progressing on this file. But I was lucky to hire Caitlin, the climate change coordinator, who is very skilled at many things, but in particular inventorying and emissions calculations. And when we first got on board, we were saying, well, what are we going to do here to analyze our portfolio? And at the same time, the CBR grant funding stream came up, which is very lucrative in the sense that it covers 80% of study costs. So we said, let's apply for the grant. Let's go do these audits. And then we're able to, I think, get up to 10 buildings, which represents a large portion of our emissions from our building portfolio. We have 40 buildings in total. So that's a good number. And so we did that. But then we're like, well, how are we actually going to take this information into a corporate strategy? And this is where the option to, plan and hire a consultant to kind of bring it all together came into play. And we're like, we could do that. But then we're like, well, maybe if we do these audits and we get all the information from the audits, maybe we could put the information together and do it ourselves. And we slowly crept into this world where we were deciding to actually compile this information and do the strategy in-house. So there's some pros and cons to that, which I'll speak to in a sec. We're in the middle of these net zero studies. They're going to be finished in July, and we're learning a lot from that. And in particular, I'm really interested in the costing of the capital improvements and the methodologies for which selection we're going to do in terms of forecasting for the building. So that's really cool. We're also completed a renewable energy analysis where we looked at all of our buildings in our portfolio. We looked at some of the land in the city that the city owns, and we mapped out where can we put solar PV and what's the size and what's the potential cost. So now you can essentially think, if we are able to triage and prioritize those activities on the solar side, you could say in 2031, we're going to put up a 10 megawatt array, say at our landfill. And then we know in our emissions profile, when we're getting to net zero, we plug that cost into the model. We know we're going to reduce our emissions by X because we're generating solar at that time. So you can see the overlay of the data that we're planning and intending to do when we have these different sources of information. Then the challenge is we have other buildings outside the 10 that we studied. And we had an amazing meeting with Whitby where they said that they did their portfolio analysis in-house. And then we thought, well, why don't we do ours in-house, which sounds like a great idea until you have 30 buildings that you have to do this with. But what we want to do is take the assumptions and a lot of the information from the studies and overlay them with the smaller buildings. So if you have a washroom on a waterfront that has a bit of heating, a bit of electricity, to do that analysis on the conversion for net zero actually isn't that challenging outside of sitting down and doing that analysis when you have 70 other things to do. So that's kind of another step in this process. Capital planning review. So we typically use facility condition assessments to capital plan, or if there's an imminent failure, someone says next year we got to replace this piece of equipment. So we need to streamline our capital planning to align with the outcomes of our net zero audits, meaning that when we get these audits, we're going to have a series of coupled projects that could put together in certain timelines, plug that into the capital plan and plug all the money in and the costs associated with that. And it's a bit challenging because historically you might have one building that has 22 projects over the next 7 years, but a lot of those projects are smaller and could be combined. So pulling those pieces of projects out, pulling them together, and then having a good form that goes into the capital plan will be part of this exercise as well. And then there's also a bit of modeling analysis here. So if you have a rec center and it has an energy profile of X, what's the plan for that rec center? Is it going to grow? Is it an addition? Are we going to have more people show up to the rec center? Is the energy use going to go up or down? In our water and wastewater infrastructure, we're growing as a community. We're going to not quite double, but we're going to significantly increase our population. So how is the increase in the population going to model out? So we're going to rely on those master plans that say, you know, our population is going to grow by X, our water demand is going to grow by X. We correlate that to our energy use, and then we map that out. And then you start to see, okay, our water use is going to go here. So these are the interventions that we have to outline with, let's say, our water portfolio. And I just put this in here. This is just a table. I like tables. And essentially for every asset that we have in our corporate building portfolio, we're going to have this mapped out to 2050. And we'll have the energy cost, the GHGs associated with the energy, and then the capital plan. So say at Allendale Rec Center, we're going to put a new solar array at 2025. You'd see in this cell a bunch of money put in there. And then when we report to council, we can roll up what the capital cost is. So we're going to spend X amount of money on the capital dollars over the next 30 years. And then you can total all the numbers and do all the financial analysis. This sounds really good right now because we haven't done the exercise, but once we get all the data, it'll be interesting to see when we roll it all up, but there's some benefits to this approach. So part of this activity is we're meeting with the different client groups in the city. We're within corporate facilities and we manage a bucket of buildings, but recreation is a different department, water is a different department, wastewater. So what we've been doing is when we have been doing these studies or we're working with those groups to understand what their profile is going to be over the future, we're normalizing the understanding of net zero. So a lot of people aren't familiar with what it is or what it even means. So when you sit down and say, this is the reason why we're doing this, and this is the understanding of this, you're building awareness in-house while you're doing the project, so that when we get finalized, everyone's familiar with everything. They're not seeing a number and saying, we're going to spend $3 million on net zero in the next 3 years. They're going to say, oh, we're going to put a solar array that's going to reduce our utility costs to zero for our building, that kind of thing. Capacity building. If you have to do a portfolio analysis yourself, you learn a lot, and there's going to be a lot of calculations, a lot of stuff that we have to do. And then a year later, when you talk about that building, you're going to know everything about it. So we're of a certain size and scale that we could probably do this in-house. We have 40 buildings. If we had 150 buildings, we can't probably do this, probably too much. And so we're probably at that sweet spot. One thing I'm always challenged with when you do a strategy with a consultant is that they might do a great job, they might engage, they might get the data, they might have everything right, but it's a black box that goes away with them. They get their PDF and you're like, can I get that data? And they're like, oh, maybe. And then they send you a spreadsheet with all the formulas stripped out of it. When we're doing this internally allows us to, throughout the process, establish a methodology by which we can monitor and track our energy and our GHGs, so that year two, when we have our strategy that's endorsed, we can just plug in our data and say, okay, this is where we are, this is what we planned for, where's the difference? So there's a benefit on that side. And when you move to just implementation, you've essentially worked with these groups and they know what's coming. So we're just literally, we're implementing already. We're like doing things now that even though the strategy isn't formalized, we're already acting on some items. Maybe you save on consulting fees. I don't know. We're paying for consultants to do the audits. We pay for the renewable energy analysis. There'll probably be some other spends. I don't know if we're going to save money maybe on that side. Drawbacks. It requires a lot more time. If you hired a consultant, I don't know who has done this, but maybe it's a 6-month process. I don't know. We're going to be longer than that. You have to bring everyone along the path. You have to hire the consultant to do the audits. Then that's a 6-month process. You have other lags and leads. You can't do something until you have the data set. So it takes longer. And that's a drawback in some circles. We're probably going to miss stuff. We're not, like, I'm not an engineer, and we're relying on a small team. So there might be some things that if you hired a third party, it would be like, oh, this, and this. So there's going to be that kind of drawback. I don't know if other people have this, but sometimes if you go in front of council and you say something, they respond. But if you say, oh, the consultant's study report says X, then they say, oh, that's amazing. I think there's just that nuance. I don't know. I think we'll be fine because we do have expertise that will be filling into the strategy. So I'm not too concerned with that. This is what I'm concerned with, maintaining sanity. And I wrote the CDM plan for the city in 2019. And after I finished that, I swore I would never do that again. And it looks like we're doing it again. So just a few key considerations, and this is my last slide. Conservation and energy efficiency always rules. It's always the first stage, always the first step in everything. If you're going to do anything when it comes to building strategies or even like implementation, that's your first step. Integration within the capital planning group. We're pretty lucky. Our department has energy management, and we have the capital group as a branch, sister or brother branch. So we initially have a lot of synergy with them because they're just within our department. And there's a lot that you can do to integrate with the capital group. And when we first started down this path, I would get invited to the kickoff meeting, which was really exciting for me. We're gonna talk about this project, and I realized the budget for the project and the scope for the project wasn't appropriate. It doesn't consider anything I want, and now I try to ask for it, and they're like, "Well, we can't do that because we're past that point." Then I realized it's not just the kickoff, it's not the project delivery that you have to be involved with, it's the planning. So now when we're looking at projects, we're meeting with them to say, what are the projects we're looking at? What should we be considering? Which analysis should we be doing prior to doing a budget, prior to developing a scope, because we don't want to miss something. And a good example is at the Allendale Rec Center, we're doing a heat exchanger 2 years ago. Just a small project, but it's sized for 180-degree water temperature, which essentially means that you can't use a heat pump to heat it. So when they're going to do a replace it with a new one, that's a bit that would replace it and work well. But we said, no, let's do 140-degree entering temperature, because in 3 years we might want to do a heat pump. And that's like the nuance of catching all of these projects to ensure that you're not doing something now that's going to bottleneck you in the future. And what you need to do is clump like projects together, so that when you're doing your heating system of the rec center for the pool, you're doing your heat exchanger at the same time, so they can match and mesh. I was trying to find the Oprah kind of thing where she says cars for everyone for this renewable energy. But essentially, you should be planning for renewable energy and doing the feasibility analysis of all the locations that you want to deploy, and put it in the capital plan and start the process. We haven't actually had one built yet. There's a lot of resourcing issues with our capital implementation, but even working with your utility to get approvals, working with the client group, like if you want to put a solar panel on a water plant, you got to talk to the water plant people, and they might say, well, we can't put it there. And then, so there's that whole planning element to that. So start working on renewable energy. Try to develop these strategies that allow you to report on them easily. So if you're going to have a bunch of data that you take from your strategy, that data should live somewhere and you should be easily able to update it. If you have to redo all the data management every time you update, all you're going to be doing is playing with Excel. So this is something to consider. And the last one is integration with operational groups. And this is challenging. The biggest opportunity is when equipment fails, and it happens all the time, where something blows up and the operations people are like, okay, I'm ordering a rooftop unit, we're going to get it in 2 weeks. And I'm like, well, what about this? And they're like, well, that's going to be 4 weeks. We can't do that. So this literally happened yesterday. We have an art gallery, and we have to heat the art gallery in the summer months because of dehumidification. It hurts my soul. I don't like heating in the summer, but the boilers are failing. So this is a perfect application for a heat pump, because in the summer you can use a heat pump, but we have to be working with them to say, here's the option, here's the cost, here's the feasibility, let's consider it. And you have to be really integrated with your groups. And we miss these sometimes because they work hard and they have to get something fixed. But being involved with the operational groups for them to give you a call and say, hey, what about this? What about that? And it really helps if you have money sometimes for that, because they'll come to you. So that's another thing for a key consideration. And that is all.